Hello, everyone. Take a look at any modern map of our oceans. What do you see? A vast, empty expanse of blue. It's clean, scientific, a predictable space defined by longitude and latitude. But travel back just 500 years, and the maps told a profoundly different story. They were alive. The empty blue was teeming with life, but not the kind we catalogue today. It was a realm of coiled serpents with manes of fire, of krakens dragging ships to the abyss, of monstrous sea pigs with tusks and armored whales that could swallow a vessel whole. The conventional wisdom is simple, almost comforting. Our ancestors were superstitious, ignorant. They feared the unknown, and so they filled the blank spaces on their maps. The infamous "here be dragons," but what if that's not the whole story? What if the monsters weren't just filler for the empty parts of the world? What if they were data? What if every terrifying illustration, every grotesque beast, was a warning meticulously recorded by the people who saw them? Today, we're not just looking at old drawings on decaying parchment. We are reopening a cold case that has been closed for centuries. We are asking a terrifying question. To answer that, we must step into the mind of a man who saw them everywhere. His name was Olaus Magnus, and in 1539 he created a map that would become the definitive guide to the nightmares of the northern seas. It wasn't a work of fantasy. To him, it was a work of fact. A survival guide, Olaus Magnus was not some wild-eyed mystic living in a cave. He was an archbishop. From this center of Renaissance learning, he embarked on an obsessive quest to map the north, the wild, semi-mythical lands of Scandinavia. For years he collected stories. Not myths, he would have argued, but testimonies. He spoke to sailors with haunted eyes, fishermen who had lost brothers to the deep, whalers who returned with stories that defied belief. And when he finally published his masterpiece, the Fay Carta, it was a sprawling, beautiful, and utterly terrifying work of art and science. On land, it was remarkably accurate for its time. But in the water, there were monsters. Look closely. Off the coast of Norway, a colossal lobster, larger than a fishing boat, has a man in its claws, lifting him from his vessel as his comrades watch in horror. Further out, a sea serpent, hundreds of feet long, has wrapped itself around a ship, its fanged mouth open to pluck a sailor from the deck. There are sea rhinos, creatures with the bodies of fish and the horns of land beasts, ramming ships from below. There is the sea swine, a pig-like creature with a monstrous head and sharp tusks. Each one is drawn with such conviction, such anatomical detail, that it feels less like an invention and more like a specimen. Critics in his time, and historians for centuries after, dismissed these as allegories, or simply as decorations to make the map more interesting. They were wrong. Olaus provided a key, a guide to his map. In his later book, Fair Description of the Northern People's Fate, he described their habits, their hunting methods, their weaknesses. He wrote of the Norwegian sea serpent, telling us it was a creature of deep fjords and coastal waters, emerging on warm summer nights. He said it was black, 200 feet long, 20 feet thick, with a mane of hair hanging from its neck and sharp scales. It would rise from the water like a coiled pillar, snatching livestock from the shore or sailors from their ship. He wasn't just describing a monster, he was describing an animal. He gave its habitat, its diet, its physical characteristics. This wasn't mythology, this was zoology. He wrote about whales, but not the whales we know. He described monstrous whales, so large they were often mistaken for islands. He tells a story, repeated by sailors for centuries, of men landing on what they think is a small islet to cook a meal, only for the island to shudder and plunge into the depths, revealing itself as the back of a gargantuan beast. He called one of these the trollule, a malicious whale that would intentionally sink ships by ramming them or capsizing them with its fluke. Was this just a fisherman's tale, or was it an attempt to describe the behavior of a sperm whale, a creature known to be aggressive in a time before scientific classification existed? The most terrifying aspect of the Fay Carta Marina, Fay isn't the monsters themselves, but their placement. They aren't scattered randomly. They are concentrated in specific areas: the treacherous waters of the Norwegian Sea, the whirlpools of the Lofoten Islands, the dark, icy expanses of the North Atlantic. These were the most dangerous sailing routes of the 16th century. Olaus wasn't just decorating his map, he was color, coding it with death. The monsters were a graphical representation of danger. Here the map screamed, the sea itself. But if they were just symbols, why the incredible detail? Why give them names, behaviors, life cycles? Why write a whole encyclopedia about them? The answer is chilling. Olaus Magnus and the countless sailors he interviewed believed what they were saying. To them, the sea serpent was as real as the cod they fished. The Kraken was as real as the storms they weathered. We live in an age that has tamed the world. We've mapped every... It's hard for us to comprehend the mindset of a 16th century sailor. For them, setting sail from the coast of Norway was like launching into outer space. The ocean was not a surface to be crossed. It was a universe, an alien world of unimaginable depth and pressure. They had no sonar, no GPS, no satellite weather forecasts. They had a wooden ship, cloth sails, and a compass that spun. Everything beyond the horizon was a complete and terrifying mystery. When the waves rose like mountains and the sky turned black, when strange shapes moved beneath their hull in the phosphorescent water, when a great tentacle thick as a tree trunk wrapped around their mast. What were they supposed to think? That it was a weather balloon, a trick of the light? Number they thought it was the serpent. They thought it was the Kraken. They knew it was. It was a legacy of terror. Imagine you are one of these sailors. You are on a multi-month voyage, subsisting on hardtack and salted fish. Scurvy is loosening your teeth. You haven't seen land in weeks. The world has shrunk to the creaking timbers of your ship and the endless, indifferent ocean. One night, on watch, you see it, a disturbance in the water. Not a wave, something organized. A series of coils rising and falling in perfect rhythm, stretching for a distance that your mind can't quite process. A head, like that of a horse or a dragon, rises from the waves, its eyes glowing with a faint, cold light. It looks at your ship, not with aggression, but with a kind of ancient, reptilian intelligence. And then it sinks back beneath the waves, leaving you alone in the dark, the crew. They'll think you've gone mad from the isolation, but then, a week later, another sailor sees it, and then another. Soon the entire crew is living in a state of quiet dread, scanning the horizon not for land, but for the serpent. This wasn't a one-time event. Reports of these creatures are shockingly consistent across cultures and centuries. The Vikings called the serpent Japhen Mongandra. Greek mythology had Scylla and Hydra. The Bible speaks of the Leviathan, different names, different cultures, but the description is hauntingly similar, a massive, serpentine creature of the deep. What were they all seeing? Skeptics offer a tidy explanation. A line of dolphins or porpoises leaping from the water could look like coils. A floating log or a mass of seaweed could be mistaken for a monster in the fin of a basking shark or a whale could look like a serpent's back. And yes, some sightings can probably be explained this way, but not all of them. Not the ones that describe a head rising 30 feet out of the water. Not the ones that describe the creature moving with deliberate, undulating motions against the current. The sheer number of sightings documented by sober, respected sea captains and naval officers is difficult to In August of 1848, the crew of the HMS Daedalus, a British Royal Navy frigate, had an encounter that became official record. Captain Peter Menquet and several of his officers and crew saw a creature swimming alongside their ship for 20 minutes. They described it as an enormous serpent, at least 60 feet of which was visible above the water. It had a head like a snake, held 4 feet high, and it moved at a steady 15 miles per HR, leaving a wake behind it. This wasn't a drunken sailor on a fishing trawler. This was a Royal Navy captain on a military vessel who filed an official report with the Admiralty. His report was published in the Times of London, causing a sensation. The scientific establishment, led by the famous paleontologist Richard Owen, immediately attacked him. Owen argued, without ever having seen the creature, that it must have been a seal. A seal, Captain Menquet, a man who had spent his life at sea, was publicly ridiculed for being unable to tell the difference between a 60-foot sea serpent and a seal. The message was clear: people of authority, not because the creatures disappeared, but because the people who saw them learned to stay silent. It was better to be thought a liar in private than a fool in public. The serpent was banished from the world of science and relegated to the world of folklore. But the most famous of all the map monsters, the one that has haunted our collective nightmares for 1,000 years, is not the serpent. It is a creature of impossible scale, a living... The legend of the Kraken comes from the same cold northern waters that birthed the sea serpent, the seas between Norway and Iceland. Norse sagas from the 13th century speak of the Hafgufa, a sea monster so vast it was often mistaken for an island. But the definitive description comes from a Norwegian bishop, Erik Pontoppidan. In his 1755 work, Faith Natural History of Norway Fae. Like Olaus Magnus, Pontoppidan was a man of the cloth and a scholar. He meticulously collected accounts from sailors and fishermen. His description of the Kraken is terrifyingly precise. He wrote that the creature was the size of a small island, 1.5 miles in circumference. It spent most of its time on the seafloor, but when it rose, it was an omen of great fishing. The Kraken, he explained, would emit a powerful, alluring scent or excrement that would draw fish to it. Vast schools of fish would swarm above the dormant beast. Fishermen who knew the signs would rush to the area, casting their nets. They knew they had only a short time. They watched for the signs of the Kraken's ascent, the water bubbling, the sea level seemingly rising. When the Kraken began to stir, because when the beast finally submerged, it created a whirlpool so powerful it could pull down the largest warships. But the true danger was when it was feeding. Pontoppidan describes its arms, or tentacles, as being thick as the mast of a medium-sized ship. These arms were lined with suckers and hooks, and they were powerful enough to seize the largest man. Of war, drag it to the bottom of the ocean, and he wrote, if its arms were to lay hold of the largest man, of war they would certainly draw it down to the bottom. For centuries, this was considered pure fantasy, the ravings of a superstitious bishop, the tall tales of terrified sailors, a creature 1.5 miles wide, preposterous. An animal that could pull a warship to the bottom of the sea, impossible. The Kraken became It appeared in literature, in Verne's Asterix 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea's Fae. But in the real world, it was extinct, not from the oceans, but from the realm of possibility. Science had declared the Kraken a myth, and science was wrong, utterly, completely wrong. The story of how the Kraken returned from the dead, how it clawed its way back from myth into biology, is one of the most incredible. A hard black parrot, like beak, found in the stomach of a sperm whale. It was huge, far larger than any known squid. Then, in the 1850s, a colossal squid washed ashore in Denmark. The age of myth was over, and the age of zoology was in full swing. The creature was dissected, studied, and given a scientific name, Phaeaceteuthis dux phi. The legend was real, but the reality was, in some ways, even more terrifying. We now know that the giant squid can grow to lengths of over 40 feet, maybe more. They live in the abyssal depths, a world of crushing pressure and eternal darkness. They have the largest eyes of any animal on Earth, the size of dinner plates, designed to capture the faintest glimmers of bioluminescence in the deep. Their tentacles are lined, and we know they do battle with sperm whales, the only predator large enough to hunt them. The evidence is carved into the skin of the whales themselves. Huge circular scars, sometimes feet in diameter, left by the squid's suckers in Titanic. Deep-sea battles we can only imagine. Think about Pontoppidan's description. A creature that lives on the seafloor, tentacles that can wrap around a ship, a danger to... A 40-foot squid is not 1.5 miles wide, of course, but sailors in a small wooden boat, confronted by a writhing mass of tentacles and a giant intelligent eye in the middle of a storm, could easily have exaggerated the size. The core of the story, the terrifying truth of a colossal, tentacled monster from the deep, was accurate. These sailors' accounts weren't lies. They were the first field report. The stories of the Kraken pulling down ships are now being re-examined. While a 40-foot squid probably couldn't sink a large man of war, a 17th-century fishing vessel, or even a small trading ship, it's entirely possible. A squid, perhaps mistaking the ship's hull for the body of a whale, could have latched on, and in the ensuing chaos, the ship could have capsized or been damaged enough to sink. It's a recurring theme, the sheer volume of these reports from an era of exploration and discovery is staggering. If you are finding this deep dive into forgotten history as gripping as a kraken's tentacle, please take a moment to drag that subscribe button down to the abyss and give this video a like. It truly helps us continue to chart these unknown waters. Now, what if I told you the giant squid isn't? In 2007, a fishing boat in the Ross Sea off Antarctica pulled up something from the depths. It was a squid, but it was bigger, heavier, and meaner than any giant squid ever seen. They called it the colossal squid, Femiconicatus hamiltoni fe. It's not as long as the giant squid, but it is far more massive, with a shorter, bulkier body, and its tentacle, instead of just tooth suckers, it has a series of swiveling, three-pointed hooks. It is quite literally armed to the teeth. We know almost nothing about this creature. We've only ever caught a handful of specimens. We have no idea how big they can truly get. The deep sea is the last true frontier on Earth. Over 80% of it remains unexplored, unmapped, and unobserved. We know more about the surface. Every time we send a submersible down into the abyss, we find new species, new life forms that defy our understanding of biology. Creatures that live in total darkness, withstand crushing pressure, and thrive near volcanic vents, spewing superheated chemicals. We are discovering a world that is far stranger and far more monstrous than Olaus Magnus could have ever imagined. So we have to... When those ancient sailors described a sea serpent, were they really just seeing a line of dolphins, or could they have been seeing something else? A creature that still lives undiscovered, in the depths like a species of giant serpentine eel or a surviving marine reptile from the age of dinosaurs like a plesiosaur. Before you dismiss that as impossible, consider the coelacanth. This was a fish thought to have gone extinct with the dinosaurs 65 million years ago. We knew it only from fossils. Then in 1938, a living coelacanth was caught off the coast of South Africa. A living fossil swimming in our oceans, completely unknown to science for millions of years. If a creature like the coelacanth could coelacanths for 65 million years, what else is down there? It's vast, it's deep, and it's opaque. We can't see into it. A large marine animal with a small population could easily avoid detection for centuries. This brings us to the third great monster of the deep, a creature whose name is synonymous with apocalyptic power, the Leviathan. Unlike the Kraken or the sea serpent, the Leviathan is not born from sailors' tales. Its origins are far more ancient, found in the oldest texts of Western civilization. The Book of Job in the Old Testament gives a chillingly detailed description. It is a creature of immense power, impervious to human weapons. Can you pull in Leviathan with a fish hook or tie down its tongue with a rope? If you lay a hand on it, you will remember the struggle and never do it again. Any hope of subduing it is false. Its back has rows of shields tightly sealed together. Each is so close to the next that no air can pass between. They are joined fast to one another. They cling together and cannot be parted. Its snorting throws out flashes of light. Its eyes are like the rays of dawn. Flames stream from its mouth. Sparks of fire shoot out. Smoke pours from its nostrils, as from a boiling pot over burning reed. Its breath sets coals ablaze, and flames dart from its mouth. This is not a description of any known animal. It breathes fire. Its scales are like shields. It is a creature of divine, terrible power, a symbol of the untamable chaos of creation. For centuries, scholars have tried to identify the Leviathan with a real-world animal. Some say it is a poetic description of but neither fits the bill. A crocodile is a river animal, not a creature of the great deep. A whale doesn't have impenetrable scales or breathe fire. The description seems purely mythological, but here's where it gets interesting. The description of Leviathan isn't just in the Book of Job. Similar creatures appear in other ancient Near Eastern mythologies. In Canaanite texts from Ugarit, predating the Bible, there is a seven-headed sea serpent called Lotan, whom the storm god Baal defeats. In Babylonian mythology, the creation epic Enuma Elish tells of the goddess Tiamat, a monstrous goddess of the primordial sea, who is slain by the god Marduk to create the world. There is a consistent theme across the ancient world, a monstrous, serpentine chaos, dragon of the sea, who represents the terrifying, untamable power of the ocean, and who must be defeated by a hero or a god to bring order to the world. So is Leviathan just a symbol, a metaphor for chaos, or is it, like the Kraken, a cultural memory of something real, a memory that has been distorted and magnified through millennia of retelling, but with a kernel of truth at its core? What could have inspired such a myth? Perhaps a creature now extinct. Imagine ancient sailors witnessing a mosasaur or another massive marine reptile from the Cretaceous period. To them, it would have been a dragon, a god, a true Leviathan. But even that seems unlikely. It is the personification of the sea itself. Its power, its mystery, its capacity for sudden, overwhelming violence. The fire breathing is a metaphor for the bioluminescence seen in the deep, or the plumes of steam from a whale's blowhole catching the dawn light just right. The impenetrable scales are the crushing, unyielding pressure of the depths. The Leviathan is every sailor's worst fear, but the fact that so many cultures, separated by time and geography, independently created a myth of a great sea dragon suggests a shared human experience, a universal terror of what lies beneath the waves as the age of exploration gave way to the age of enlightenment in the 18th century. The world changed, science, reason, and empirical evidence became the new gods. There was no room for monsters. The goal was no longer to tell a story or to warn of dangers, but to create a precise mathematical representation of the globe. The flamboyant, artistic maps of men like Olaus Magnus were replaced by the clean, sparse lines of scientific charts. And with this change, the monsters vanished. One by one, they were hunted down and exterminated. Not with harpoons, but with ink and... The Kraken was laughed off as a fairy tale. The sea pig and the sea rhino were erased, deemed too fanciful to have ever existed. The map was wiped clean. The world, it seemed, had been fully explored and catalogued. The blank spaces were filled in, and the monsters had nowhere left to hide. This was an act of profound intellectual arrogance. The scientists of the Enlightenment, in their eagerness to banish superstition, threw the baby out with the bathwater. They assumed that because their ancestors lacked scientific instruments, they must have been fools. They failed to consider that these sailors' stories, these mapmakers' drawings, were not fantasies, but data filtered through the lens of a pre-scientific worldview. They were trying to describe real phenomena. A large, aggressive sperm whale ramming a ship became a malicious island. Fish, a giant squid pulling on an anchor line, became a tentacled monster from the abyss. The phosphorescent glow of a massive school of jellyfish became the glowing eyes of a sea dragon. We didn't lose the monsters, we lost the ability to understand the language they were being described in. For 200 years, the oceans on our maps remained empty, and then we invented the submarine. We invented deep-sea cameras. We invented sonar, and we went down. We plunged into the world that Olaus Magnus could only guess at. The world that sailors had feared for millennia, the abyss. And what we found there should have humbled us. We found the vampire squid, a creature that can turn itself inside out. We found the goblin shark. We found the anglerfish, with its own bioluminescent lure to attract prey in the total darkness. We found tube worms living on chemical energy at the bottom of the ocean, a form of life we didn't even know was possible. We found the giant squid. We found the colossal squid. We discovered that whales communicate in complex songs that travel across entire oceans. We learned of rogue waves, monstrous, 100-foot walls of water that were once dismissed as sailors' myths, but are now known to be a terrifyingly real, if rare, phenomenon. We discovered that the ocean is not empty. It is teeming with life, much of it more alien and more monstrous than anything our ancestors could have drawn. Every time we push the boundaries of exploration, we find something that science had The monsters were removed from the maps. But were they ever truly removed from the sea? We've explained the Kraken as the giant squid, but the sailors who saw it described it as being 1.5 miles wide. Was that just exaggeration? Or have we only found the juveniles of a species that can grow to truly incomprehensible sizes in the deepest, most inaccessible trenches of the ocean? We've dismissed the great sea serpent, but every year there are still credible sightings, from fishermen, from tourists, even from scientists, of large, unidentified marine animals. Are they all mistaken? Every single one of them? Or is there a creature out there, a relic from a bygone age that has learned to be very, very good at hiding? The ancient maps were a reflection of the human mind. They mapped not only the coastlines and the currents, but also, when we scrubbed the monsters from our charts, we told ourselves we were being scientific. But perhaps we were just being arrogant. We convinced ourselves that we had conquered the ocean, that we understood it. But the deep still holds its secrets. The truth is, we stand on the shores of the greatest mystery on our planet, and we have barely dipped our toes in the water. The old maps, with their Krakens and their serpents, they acknowledge a simple, terrifying truth that we have tried very hard to forget. We do not rule the waves, and in the great, dark, crushing pressure of the abyss, there are still things that have no name here. There be monsters. That is all for today's video. If you enjoyed this journey into the mysteries of the deep, please subscribe, like, and support us. Let us know in the comments which of these sea legends you find the most terrifying,